discoveries that you guys had over the summer, some of the things that you did. First of all, what does it mean to be a Smithsonian affiliate?
Okay, a Smithsonian affiliate is an institution that is affiliated with the Smithsonian. We meet some of the same criteria that they do in terms of museum excellence, but it also is a relationship where we can get material on loan from the Smithsonian to have on exhibit and display here and that sort of thing.
Okay. And we'll just start from the beginning. What did you guys find this summer in your dives?
Okay. Well, this summer we had some bad weather. So our field school, which we run every June, worked inshore mostly, ground truthing targets that we have previously identified. We take students, usually from college, occasionally high school, who want to find out if they're interested in doing underwater archaeology professionally, and we throw them in the water and we show them what it's all about. And at the end of the field school, they know whether they want to do it or not, which is an important thing. So they got really good work on the inshore waters. We did get offshore to our 18th century shipwreck site, which we called a storm wreck. And the exciting discoveries this summer were the muskets. We found 3 Brown Bess muskets. The Brown Bess was standard British issue military equipment during the American Revolutionary War.
When had you guys first identified this storm wreck?
This wreck was identified, or ground truthed, at the end of the diving season in 2009. Actually, about 2 days before our permit expired.
And is it just identified as a storm wreck currently?
Yes. The survey area was designated as storm. All the survey areas during 2009 had comic hero names. So this was storm. And so the shipwreck itself is still unidentified. In terms of the name of the vessel and that sort of thing. We have a pretty good idea that it's an American colonial vessel, possibly British built, but carrying American loyalist colonials out of Charleston, South Carolina, in December of 1782.
And were muskets the only thing you found so far from that wreck?
Oh no, we found lots of things. A lot of the objects that we find are encrusted, and we call them concretions. When an iron object falls into the ocean, it has calcium carbonate accrete onto it. That's what shells are made out of, and the ocean is full of it. So after a couple hundred years, you get this thing that looks like a rock, but inside of it are a number of objects. And then we x-ray those objects. So we have irons, for ironing clothes. We have a lot of cooking cauldrons. We have a pair of navigational dividers. We have a penknife. We have tools like hammers, axes. We found, I guess I mentioned, a lot of cooking cauldrons. And one of them actually had a pea in it, the remains of a pea. And that's actually a very important piece of evidence because it tells us that that cauldron was actually used to cook in. It wasn't just some merchant's cargo. So we're finding household objects, and we're also finding military objects on the ship. I suppose what most people would consider the most exciting finds on this wreck site so far are the cannons. We've found 6 cannons so far, and the ship's bell, which is made of bronze, which was a very exciting discovery we made in December of 2010.
Was there any one particular item that helped give you clues as to what time period the shipwreck came from?
The carronade. The carronade, we have 2 of them on the site. They're cannons. They're a specific kind of cannon that was first invented in 1776. So right away we knew that our site had to date after 1776. And then when we raised 2 cannons from the shipwreck, one was a typical long gun, which turned out to be a 4-pounder. That is to say, it fired a 4-pound cannonball. And the other was this carronade, which fired a 9-pound ball. But that carronade actually had a date on it. And that date was 1780. So then we knew that the wreck hadn't occurred before 1780.
Is that the oldest piece of history you found?
As far as Lamp goes, Lamp has actually worked on an earlier shipwreck, the Industry, which was a transport that a British transport that came here to St. Augustine at the very beginning of the British period in 1764, and it was wrecked here on the bar. So that predates our site by some 20 years, more or less.
I've read that you're in search of the lost French fleet of Jean Ribault.
Jean Ribault, yes. That fleet has to do with the birth of St. Augustine. It was an incredibly important historical event that occurred in 1565. And Pedro Menendez, who is the founder of our town, arrived here on the coast the day after this French fleet had arrived, bringing reinforcements to Fort Caroline, which is up today in the Jacksonville area. And Pedro Menendez came down here to St. Augustine, started unloading his ships and essentially digging in because he expected that the French were going to lay siege to him here. The French and the Spaniards were not getting along very well at the time, and this was all considered Spanish New World, so the French were viewed as interlopers. Anyway, while Pedro was digging in, the French fleet anchored offshore, and it's a shallow bar, so the French fleet could not actually come into the harbor. And either a hurricane or a nor'easter came up, and the French fleet had to try to get to sea to clear the coast, and they never could clear Cape Canaveral. And so the French fleet essentially went ashore in the region of Cape Canaveral and to the north. And so that's the fleet that we're looking for, because it had to do with one of the main events of the founding of St. Augustine. And it also marked really the end of French Florida, because without that fleet, the French had very little chance here in Florida. And during that storm, Pedro Menendez marched through the hurricane to Fort Caroline and surprised it and captured the fort. So the French were, well, essentially completely outgeneraled and outdone and undone by the weather.
So you could argue that your research really has a critical role in developing the history of St. Augustine.
Absolutely.
Pretty cool. Do you believe that there are treasures somewhere out in the Atlantic?
Treasure?
Treasure.
Oh, sure. Let's define our terms. For me, treasure is really what's locked into the concretions. For me, it's about the objects in the ship, and actually the ship itself, the hull, and the architecture that went into that hull. How was it built? What kind of woods did they use? The joinery. That's all very interesting to me, and I sort of consider that treasure. Most people, when they think of treasure, think of large blocks of gold that the Spaniards carried, or huge chests of silver coins. And there are a few ships out there that have said treasures on board. And it's unfortunate that it has such a grip on the imagination, because what happens is a lot of treasure hunters go out there and they find a wreck and they naturally assume that it's carrying that, and they dig it up and pretty much destroy it, looking for those high value items without really giving due regard to the archaeology of the site and the objects on the site and the relationship between the objects on the site that tell the story of that site.
That's very insightful. I'm just curious what kind of affects storms like Tropical Storm Debbie that we saw earlier this summer and Sandy